So now over here you can see that this entire appendicular skeleton, when we are talking about appendicular skeleton, over there its work is to help you perform movement and locomotion. So for movement and locomotion, what is the most important thing you require for movement and locomotion? One is your skeletal muscles. You will require the skeleton, no doubt. You require tendons. You require ligaments. Now talking mainly about your skeleton. Now over here in this skeleton, as I mentioned, it is no doubt the appendicular skeleton over here which is responsible for bringing out the locomotion and movement. But when we talk about appendicular skeleton over here, it mainly consists of your limbs. Limbs means the upper limbs and the lower limbs. Okay, upper limbs and lower limbs. And then apart from that, what do you have? You have something called the girdles. Now what is girdles and why is it so important for our studies? Now girdles are important because अभी limbs जो है अपने आप से नहीं चलेगा. Okay, your hands are not going to be kept somewhere and all of a sudden they start walking, they start writing, they start eating. Means anybody around that thing will be scared and literally will be dead if they see that thing. So girdles are something which are holding the hands and the legs or the upper limbs and the lower limbs, or you can say the forelimbs and the hind limbs in proper position, and they are coordinating the movement as well as locomotion. So girdles, as I mentioned, limbs, they are of two types. The upper limbs are there, then you have the lower limbs. Lower limbs यानी कि legs and upper limbs means the hands. Now girdles, they are also of two types. One is your pectoral girdle, or which we also refer to as the shoulder girdle. Then another one you have which is the pelvic girdle. Okay, now pectoral or the shoulder girdle, it is actually, as I mentioned, the name shoulder, the name is enough. It is present just near your, you can see the neck, and you can actually literally feel the shoulders over there, and this diagram is also something about your shoulder girdle. Okay, now what is most important about your pectoral or shoulder girdle? Now it consists of two most important bones. What are they? One is your flat scapula. Okay, so this is your scapula. This is the flat scapula which is present. And then you have over here one important process which is referred to as your clavicle or the collar bone. Okay, now apart from these two, there are lots of other processes which you can see over here. Okay, and they are responsible for holding or placing this entire thing in association with your forelimb as well as your sternum, which is connecting the entire rib cage with the vertebral column. So this is what the function is mainly. Now when you have seen the scapula over here, you can see a lot of certain projections which are located over here. Now what is the function of these projections? Now first projection which you can see exactly, that is over here, one is your coracoid process. Then you can see another thing which is called the glenoid cavity. So these are two important things. One is this glenoid cavity, another one is this coracoid process. Now the glenoid cavity is actually, you can say, a hole or a cavity or a depression in that entire girdle where you will see the head of the upper limb is going to fix. Okay, so this particular region is actually the head of the upper limb which is going to get fitted completely into the glenoid cavity of the shoulder girdle. So they generally ask what is the cavity or what is the location of this glenoid cavity. So location of glenoid cavity is in the shoulder or the pectoral girdle. What is the function? The glenoid cavity holds the uppermost part or the head of the humerus, or you can say the head of the uppermost limb, which is going to help in carrying out the movements of our upper limbs or the hands. The easiest way to answer for you people. Now apart from that, you can say, they might even ask you to actually write, or you can say with the help of a diagram to demonstrate all these things. So remembering pectoral girdle, is bit easy because there is not much of these bones which you need to remember. So these are mostly your medical terms and all. So what you exactly require, one is the scapula, one is clavicle, then you need to remember the glenoid cavity. Three most important things which you need to remember. Now next, moving on to the most important part, that is the pelvic girdle. Now before I move into pelvic girdle, how many pectoral girdles will be there? So for both the arms you require two pectoral girdles. Okay. Similarly over here you can see the hip girdle or the pelvic girdle. Now this is the vertebral column which you can see over here, and as I had mentioned, the sacrum is the one which maintains the continuity between the two hip girdles. So you can say there are two hip or pelvic girdles. They are placed in close proximity to each other, or they are in articulation with the help of the sacrum, and sacrum is actually addressed as your S5, that is the fused 5, because 5 vertebrae, they are fused together to form one bone. Just at the end of this you can see the coccygeal region, that is the coccyx. Now when we talk about the pelvic girdle, especially this particular region, this pelvic girdle is actually made up of three important bones. What are these three bones? One is your ilium, another one is your ischium, and the last but not the least, that is your okay, so it is actually ilium, ischium and pubis. Now over here, these are the three bones which completely make up your pelvic girdle. But just as you have seen that yes, in the pelvic, I mean to say the pectoral girdle, there was something called the glenoid cavity into which the head of the upper arm was completely getting fixed or fit into. Now same over here for this pelvic girdle, you can see this is the head of the lower limb or the legs. So what is this cavity called? This cavity is called your acetabulum. Okay, so you can say acetabulum and glenoid cavity, they are at par. But what is the difference? Difference is glenoid cavity is found in your you can say pectoral girdle. Acetabulum is found in your pelvic girdle. In glenoid cavity, the head of the upper limb is going to articulate with, while in case of acetabulum, the head of the lower limb, or you can say the lower leg bone, that is going to get articulated with. Okay, is that clear? Another term which you will come across in between, that is your innominate. In many books they mention about INN, in some they have mentioned I single N. So what is this meaning of innominate? Now how many hip girdles or pelvic girdles is visible over here? There are actually two, and each one is addressed as one innominate. So how many innominates are there? You can say there are two in number, two innominates. So if they ask you that what is the composition of one single innominate, where do you find an innominate? So it is actually the one of the single, you can say the single pelvic girdle out of the two which is present in our body is referred to as the innominate. And what are the bones which are present in innominates? It is the ilium, ischium and pubis. Now where exactly will you find the acetabulum? Acetabulum is actually found in the one single innominate or the pelvic girdle, which is going to help in articulation of the head of the femur or the thigh bone. Okay, so this is all about your, you can say, the pelvic girdle. Now pelvic girdle, one important question comes along with the pelvic girdle when they start comparing the male pelvic girdle with the female pelvic girdle. Now what is the difference? Now generally the male pelvic girdle is slightly narrower in comparison to the female pelvic girdle. There is a specific reason, because female pelvic girdle has to be wide because it has to accommodate the fetus during the pregnancy stage. So it has to be wide because it is carrying an entire creature, a well developed body, an embryo or a fetus in its growing stage during that particular period. So in order to accommodate that entire thing over there, so the hip girdle over here is made comparatively wider in comparison to that of the male. So if you are given two skeletons and you have to make out whether it is a male skeleton or it belongs to a male person, male human being or a female human being, then this is one of those two factors which is going to help you find out whether it belongs to the male or the female. So I hope this thing is clear to everyone.